Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Shattered Horizon. This is an FPS from FutureMark Game Studio, which in itself sounds kind of weird because FutureMark is known for 3D Mark, I believe. It's a benchmarking software. Very highly respected benchmarking software. But suffice to say, this is a pretty interesting game. It has a very cool concept around it, but it had some issues at launch. Now, I'm actually very glad that this was sent to me in a guest pass by Lone Wolf. Thank you for that. It is greatly appreciated. The reason I'm so happy it was a guest pass, not just the entire game or anything, was because nobody plays this thing anymore, and it's primarily a multiplayer FPS. So that's a pretty big deal. If you're actually having a multiplayer FPS and nobody's playing it anymore, and it really hasn't been that long after its release, there's a pretty big problem there, and it warrants some explanation. Now, the biggest things about this game, first off, it was released in 2009, and it was one of the first DirectX 10 only games. And so you had to have Windows Vista at the time. Now, that's a big problem, because nobody liked Windows Vista. And moreover, nobody liked DirectX 10 because it sucked at the time. In fact, DirectX 10 still sucks. It's DirectX 11 that is running a lot better. At the time, the technology was such that the optimizations hadn't really been worked out, and so it ran like crap. And even today, it still doesn't run very well at all. We're talking, I get about 25 to 30 frames a second, and that's on lowest possible settings. If I put it up higher than that, then it kind of doesn't do anything. It just stays around 25 to 30 frames a second. It seems like it skips a lot more, particularly when I'm looking at certain effects. But other than that, it really doesn't afford that much benefit, and that's a pretty big problem. Now, the graphics themselves are really nothing to write home about. I mean, you do have some very, very nice space visuals, but the actual modeling and animation, such like that, is just average at best. In fact, the animations are outright terrible. They look like something out of a game many, many years older than this. So, it ends up looking pretty annoying as a result. The actual space environments themselves are very cool looking, but the problem is that they're mostly just background images. And so while they're very pretty background images, there's really nothing to speak of as far as special effects that really made this look any better than DirectX 9 games at the time. In fact, there are games that were a couple years older than this, and they looked far better. Like Crysis, which looks far better than this, on DirectX 9. That's a pretty big issue. When you have this game that's being touted as this big DirectX 10 game, and ooh, this is a technological leap and everything, and it doesn't look any better. In fact, it looks worse, and it runs like crap, that's a pretty big problem. Anyway, the rest of the presentation is a mixed bag. On the one hand, you have music, which is just basically generic sci-fi stuff that works okay, but you don't find it memorable at all. The voice acting just suffices, that's it. So there's really nothing to speak of there. It just does what it needs to. It's basically just announcements of the objectives and such like that. And the sound effects are the really big cool part of the sound presentation. On the one hand, you have sound effects which are actually pretty wimpy. But on the other hand, these sound effects can be turned off. And they can be turned off at the flip of a button. Now, this may not sound like a big deal, but if you know what space is like at all, it's a vacuum. There is no sound in a vacuum. So, when you're in space and you're hearing all these sounds, it's because your suit has audio receptors, apparently. And when you hit a certain button, it goes into basically a suit offline mode where you can, it's called silent running. And it's supposed to basically make you invisible to the enemy, but it turns off all your suit functions. And when you do that, all you can hear is your breathing, which is actually really cool. It really does fit the space atmosphere very well, and that particular aspect of the sound is just a very nice feature of realism. But that doesn't really help you out in the long run because you're probably never going to be using that feature at all. So, that's pretty much why it's a mixed bag there. But what about the rest of the game? Well, there's not really much to speak of in terms of storyline. It's basically the International Space Agency has done something, and the Moon Mining Corporation, or no, I don't know what the actual acronyms stand for. It's Moon Mining something, and ISA is International Space Agency. But they're in a conflict because something happened on the moon where there was an explosion that sent a crap ton of debris into orbit around Earth. And so they're in this conflict, and that's the entire storyline. That's all you need to know. That's kind of stupid, isn't it? But suffice to say, you are basically not concerned with storyline. You are concerned with the objective-based multiplayer gameplay. Although there is a single-player mode, you can play it with bots in the online mode as well. And it's actually kind of an interesting game. Not because it's a particularly interesting FPS, but because it's done in 0G. And this is a very big departure from basically every other FPS on the market. This is the only one I know of where you actually do fight in 0G. And as a result, it adds a completely different level to the gameplay that you really haven't seen before. Now, this has a variety of outcomes to it. On the one hand, it's really cool fighting in 0G. Just the idea that you're in space and you're floating around and you're spinning around in place. It's almost like you're playing a space sim, only it's not. You're actually playing an FPS. And it controls fairly naturally, the problem being that you just move really, really slowly. But this whole idea is just really cool. The problem is how it's done. And while it isn't really badly done, it's incredibly disorientating. And it takes a lot of getting used to fighting in 0G. And so once you get past that adjustment period, I can see where it would be pretty cool. But I don't know how you're going to get past that adjustment period when you have the myriad issues that the game has. One of the most notable being that it has extremely narrow FOV, which, to be honest, makes sense considering that you're in a spacesuit. But at the same time, it gives you massive headaches. At least it gave me massive headaches. And this is very rare for me with FPSs even. Most FPSs I can deal with a low FOV, but in this one in particular, it just gave me a massive headache within 10 minutes. That doesn't happen with anything else. It usually takes me a good 20 minutes to half an hour before I start getting headaches. But in this one, 10. That's a pretty big problem. And when you have that compounded with weapon variety that is incredibly low, you get an assault rifle, a machine gun, a sniper rifle, a submachine gun, and a shotgun. Those are your weapon choices. And to be honest with you, the shotgun seems really overpowered because you can actually hit stuff with it. Aiming in 0G is actually really, really hard, so that goes up to the adjustment period thing. But it just is really uninspired as far as weapon design goes. And on top of that, you get infinite ammo. You just have to reload. And it ends up just being a kind of an awkward mess of a game in terms of its FPS mechanics. What about the gameplay itself? Is it fun? No, not really. And part of that comes from the FOV headaches you get. Part of it comes from the game not running well at all. It just runs like utter crap. Part of it comes from basically nobody playing it online anymore. And with a multiplayer FPS, that's a really big deal. If nobody's playing it, then it's not worth getting. And so, even though it has a really cool idea, and that idea really should be explored more because there is absolutely massive potential for 0G FPSing. It's just that the way they've done it isn't there. And it's really weird for a game studio to be basically formed from a company that just makes benchmarking software. So that's probably it. Their inexperience with FPS making really factors in here a lot, and you can really see it. So you have a game that just runs like crap. Nobody plays it online anymore. The FPS mechanics are passable at best, but tend to be very awkward because of the 0G, which is understandable. But it's really uninspired in terms of the FPS mechanics themselves. A mixed presentation, and just a general lack of fun no matter what you're doing. You can play it in single player, you can play it in multiplayer, it doesn't matter. It's really not that great. So, I find it really hard to recommend this game. I mean, the thing is that there isn't a demo available. It's only compatible with Windows Vista and Windows 7, and nobody really plays it anymore, so there's really no point in recommending it. Although it is a really cool idea, and I really hope someone picks up on that and expounds upon it, because it could be just absolutely awesome if we see a truly good 0G FPS. So, that's really just what I think in general about it. Not that great of a game. In fact, it's not very good at all. But, really cool idea. I hope somebody picks up on it. Thanks for watching.